Hello, everybody, and welcome to Roar Lions Roar. Oh, I almost really said radio that time. I'm your host tonight, Nick Pollock, and we're here to do, we're going to try to start this kind of series of midweek podcasts going forward. So we're going to do something a little bit different today, not a game preview or a recap. But I'm joined to do this by my two wonderful co-hosts tonight, starting with Mr. Bill DeFilippo. Bill, how you doing?
Hi.
Thank you. Matt, how you doing?
Hello.
And that is Matt Filipovitz, for those of you who can't tell by the voice, not Matt DeBear, or as we refer to them, Good Matt and Bad Matt. This is Good Matt, of course.
Yeah, the evil Matt is busy tonight, so the evil Matt couldn't join us.
Yeah, evil Matt, Bad Matt. Any range of negative connotations of Matt. That's the other Matt. You can find him at PSU Matt 2005. So
just real quick, if you don't like this podcast, that is also how you get in touch with this Matt. Only if you want to be mean.
Yes.
Agreed. Yeah. With any Matts, if you have any issues with Matts in this podcast, it's PSU Matt 2005, and that's it.
It doesn't even need to be this podcast. Just if you have any issues with any Matt anywhere, you can find him at PSU Matt 2005. So like I said, we're here to talk about, we're not going to necessarily talk about just this Penn State Purdue game, but instead we are going to do the thing that every college football fan does after week one of the college football season. And we are going to talk about whether some things are overreactions or underreactions or they're spot on. So we have a list of, I don't know, maybe 15 different statements here. We probably won't get to all of them, but that's okay. And thank you to those of you who reached out on Twitter to give your possible overreactions after week one. But we're going to go through and we're going to talk about whether these statements, opinions about Penn State football after their opening week 35-31 win over Purdue, whether they're, too much, too literal, or they're right on. But before we do that, please make sure, if you are listening to this podcast, I'm assuming you're already subscribed, but if you're not, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever else you can find your podcasts, as well as follow and subscribe to us on YouTube, where you can watch this, you can see our faces. And also something we're doing now going forward, before games on Saturdays or Thursdays, whatever days they happen, we are doing a pregame show. Last week it was fun. We had a couple questions here and there. Bad Matt and I were on it. It was a lot of fun. We'll see who joins me this week. Not sure yet. Haven't planned that far ahead. But let's talk.
I think it's me.
Is it you? Oh.
I think so.
We're gonna have a good time.
I was added today in the Slack, and I was asked if I could sub in. So I think it's me this week.
Excellent.
I will be getting ready for a wedding, so not me.
What are the wedding colors?
I'm wearing a blue suit, so I imagine blue.
Nice.
Listen,
Love a blue suit.
Listen, here's the deal. I don't ask questions. I get told, Bill, this is what you got to wear for the wedding, and then I wear it, and then that's the end of it. There's no reason to do anything more than that. As long as I'm not wearing the same thing the bride is wearing, it's not going to be awkward.
Sure. And that does happen from time to time for you, I'm sure.
Yeah. That's my going to the bar garb.
So let's just dive on in here, because we have a whole bunch of things that I want to talk about here. This first statement, opinion, whatever you want to call it, comes to us courtesy of @PatUsher and @RKelly55. Pat Usher said, "They're not going to be good for my health." And RKelly55 said, "I learned I need to get my liver into mid-season form quickly." And the statement that I'm morphing these into, that Bill, we'll start with you. I want you to tell me whether it's an overreaction, underreaction, or spot on. This team is going to make a habit of late game drama.
I think that is spot on. And it's not necessarily because I think every game is going to go exactly the same as the Purdue game. It's just, I don't think the gap between Penn State and most of the teams that they're going to play this year is so vastly different that we are going to see a team that whoops ass in either direction. You look just at SP Plus, Penn State's 21. I wouldn't be surprised if they're in that 15 to 20 range for much of this season. Rest of their schedule, Ohio State's number 3, Michigan is number 4, Michigan State number 20, Auburn number 22, Minnesota 28. Then a bit of a gap, Maryland 55. Then a bit of a gap, and you get Rutgers 74, Indiana 79, Northwestern 80, Central Michigan 82, Ohio 104. I think 1, 2, 3, 4. Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State, Auburn, Minnesota, all definitely have the potential to be close games. Maryland, we spoke about this on earlier pods, but just the way that they play football and how variance gets involved in their games with how they attack a secondary, they could be a close game. Rutgers and Indiana, I'm not too worried about those. They're on the road, but sure. Northwestern looked good against Nebraska, but so did North Dakota, so whatever. And then Central Michigan and Ohio, I'm not too worried about those. So I can legitimately see a scenario where 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of Penn State's games are legitimately not exactly like the Purdue game, but really close, really tense, really competitive affairs. So I think that's spot on.
Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, I'd have to agree. Outside of 2020, there's been one real blowout that Penn State's been involved in since 2016, and that's the Michigan game of 2016. It's probably the last, because Pitt was close. 2017 losses were close. 18 losses were close. 19 losses are close. Last year, all losses I think were by less than 10 points.
Yes.
So Franklin teams just don't get blown out. Like, that's just not a thing that happens. So listen, I think if this past week taught us anything, if you're down less than 2 scores with under like 6.5 minutes to play, you're still in the game. I think that's a fair assessment for this team. And Franklin teams historically just aren't really beyond that point. So I think we're in for a lot more of these games. I hope we get some blowouts in there in between for all of our sakes, like our physical and emotional and mental health sakes. I hope we get some blowouts in there, but these teams don't get blown out. So I have to imagine we're heading for a lot of really close games. And Bill just rattled off all those teams that are really close to Penn State in the SP Plus. And SP Plus isn't a perfect metric, but it's really good at predicting how games are going to shake out and how seasons are going to shake out. So I think it's fair to say we're going to have at least 3 more games like the one we just saw. Fair to say?
Yeah, I think that I think 3 is maybe even a conservative guess as far as that goes.
Yeah.
But I want to roll right into the next opinion here because I think it's directly related to this. And this comes from at DLPPGH. PGH is Pittsburgh, right? That's how they usually abbreviate it. Yeah, they said Clifford's issues with inconsistencies still remain. So the opinion, again, directly related to this first one, I think, is what Sean Clifford showed us on Thursday night is likely what he'll be all year. Matt, let's start with you on this one. Overreaction, underreaction, spot on.
I'm going to say, I don't know how I want to lean with this one. I'm going to say this is an overreaction because I don't think he is going to have that bad of a ball again. Like that interception, like if the pick 6 doesn't happen, I think we're talking about this Sean Clifford game in such a different context because he really only had one bad throw that I can think of. And that was it. Like everything else, a lot of his incompletions were drops. The pocket was clean. Like I don't think he'll be hurried at all. So I don't think we're going to see that low, but I also don't think we're going to see that high, like what he did to end the game. Like, I don't think Clifford has even 1 or 2 more of those kind of drives to win ball games close in him. Like, that's such a rare thing. Like, if you look at all of the win probability metrics, like, sure, Penn State was favored throughout a majority of this game, but after that pick 6, it tanked. And, just the odds say that kind of comeback is not going to happen again. Again, I don't think they're going to be in that position very often where a back-breaking pick 6 is what puts them behind like that. But I just don't think we're going to see that low with that high all throughout the season. I think it's going to be steady Eddie all the way. So I guess it kind of evens out in the end, but I think it's never going to feel like it did on Thursday night, if that tracked.
Yeah, I think so. Bill, what do you think?
Like, I think we're never going to have the no, yes, like Sean Clifford drives. Like, I don't think we're going to have those in the same game. I think we're going to have a no drive again. I think we're going to have a yes drive again. I don't think we're going to have both in the same game again.
I don't know. You might be underestimating Sean Clifford there. Bill, what do you think?
I was going to say I disagree, and my sample here is 3 years of watching Sean Clifford play football. But I will say this. Well, I disagree with the no, yes, blah, 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 blah bit. But I think it's a bit of an underreaction, and it's basically because I think Penn State's running game is going to be a little bit better, and it's something that we have harped on this pod over the years. The season where Clifford looked the best as Penn State's quarterback was his first year as Penn State's starter, completed 59% of his passes, 2,654 yards, 8.3 yards per completion, 23 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, fewest interceptions, most touchdowns, most yards per attempt that he has had. His quarterback rating, 148.5, is the highest that he's had as Penn State's starter. And I think the thing that goes hand in hand in that was easily the best running game that he has had since he's taken over as the Penn State starting quarterback, between Journey Brown going for about 7 yards per carry, Noah Cain going for about 5 yards per carry, Devin Ford about 5.5 yards per carry, even Ricky Slade 4.6 yards per carry. So the reason I will say it's a bit of an overreaction, I think, is I think there is room for him to get better as Penn State's running game gets better, and I think Penn State's running game will get better. I think a lot of I won't say a lot. I would say a decent amount of the issues that we saw in the running game as I've gone back and watched was that Katron Allen and Nick Singleton are still kind of finding their footing as college running backs. But I think that having that limits the amount of, for lack of a better word, Sean Clifford can put into one of his performances. So I will say it's a tiny bit of an overreaction.
What was that Ricky Slade number? 4.6 yards per carry?
Yeah.
Is that what it was?
Yeah.
That feels impossible. Like that feels Heisman worthy after what we've seen. That's the fourth best dude.
If I remember correctly, no, his long was only 44. I thought he ripped a long one out of there. Fun fact, that year Ricky Slade's long was 44 yards. Both Will Levis and Sean Clifford had a longer run than that.
Will Levis did.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I'm excited for the Giants to draft stronger armed Daniel Jones.
God. I'm going to ignore that and not think about it. Rook, I agree. I think this is probably a little bit of an overreaction. I think something that I don't think that I personally put enough stock into, like right after the game, like in our Twitter spaces, for example, was considering the fact that Clifford missed like 8 minutes ish of game time because he had to poop at the start of the second half. And I think it's fair to say that would throw anybody off their, the rhythm. Not that he was in like some incredible rhythm at the end of the first half or anything like that, but
it made his halftime another 15 minutes longer or whatever.
Right. And not in like the good way where you want 15 minutes of rest. Like, no, that's 15 minutes of toilet clenching. We don't talk about that anymore though. I'm going to
none of us wanted to start with talking about that. I'm just pointing this out. This was your fault. Because
we just touched on the run game there a little bit. I'm going to shuffle around our order here for just a second. We're going to go to the question from at I am Brad Minuski, who said, and the statement we're going with here is that the run game is still the same as last year. And it sounds to me like both of you think this is probably an overreaction, but Bill, let's start with you.
Well, I would say it is an overreaction in that there is more talent in the backfield, and there are, for all intents and purposes, if Bryce Effner is taking over, it would be starters at every offensive line position, because Olaf Fashan, who wasn't the starter last year, Landon Tengwall barely started last year. He took over in the last game or two or three. Juice Scruggs was elsewhere on the line. Salim Wormley couldn't play last season, and Bryce Effner is new. So, maybe this is just me being ultra optimistic. It by no means looked great watching them run the ball, but I at least feel, as compared to last season, when it just felt like the running game was hopeless, there are reasons why the running game can be better this year. And there are areas where, as the season goes along, guys will get better at their various positions along the offensive line and in the backfield. And if Sean Clifford uses his legs a little bit more on designed run plays, which time will tell if that happens. So I will say that's a bit of an overreaction.
Matt, agree?
Yeah, I'll agree with that. And mostly because the dudes are different. Like the strength of this unit, or I guess not strength, the variety of what the backs in this room can do is different than what it was last year. Noah Cain, like you just saw how LSU used him, short yardage situation. For Penn State, they kind of have that again with Kayvon Lee. I think Katron Allen is faster than we give him credit for. I like what I saw. I like what I saw out of him, and I think Singleton's the game breaker. And with Keziah Holmes redshirting last year and with Devin Ford kind of going on the back burner a little bit, I don't think they had the kind of backs who could rip that big play. And I think all it's going to take is one big play for this group to explode. I actually was listening to Franklin on the Jim Rome show right before we went on, and he said there were more lanes than he realized. He said if Singleton, obviously if you got to make the plays for us to count it, but he said if Singleton makes one guy miss, there's a 95-yard touchdown on his first drive. And I think he'll learn how to hit those holes. Again, these are dudes, I think it was Bill, you mentioned it a couple of days ago, that these are dudes who are going from being the best guy on the football field by a wide margin to now being another guy on the football field. So I think they're going to learn how they have to run and how they break a big play. I think that's going to come relatively quickly, and I think it's going to look a lot different than what we saw it look like last year. It's still going to be frustrating a lot. But again, I made that point on the podcast that came out, I think, yesterday, that they didn't have very many tackles behind the line of scrimmage. And if you gain 1 yard, that feels a lot better than losing 1 yard. And I think Penn State's going to gain 1 yard a lot more often. They'll lose one this year.
Yeah, for me, I know, I don't remember who wrote the article now, but somebody pointed out that the run game or the run blocking, whatever it was, graded out worse than almost every game from last year, which, I mean, I'm not going to argue the numbers. Like, I don't know the specifics of how all of those are calculated. But to me, it's kind of like what you just said, Matt. It's the difference between the line allowing dudes to be in the backfield on every run snap as compared to, like, is this a great run blocking offensive line? No. A great run blocking offensive line gets their first block and has at least two guys moving to the second level to engage with the linebackers. This group is not doing that yet, but they are at least getting some push off the line, which looked a lot different than what we saw last year. Like they were moving backwards on almost every snap last year, and they didn't do that on Thursday night. Again, I don't know how the numbers are computed, but it looked different to me.
I will read it. You're referencing something that Audrey Snyder wrote over in The Athletic.
Yes.
The offensive line, again, had a share of issues. Reading directly from Audrey here. According to True Media, Penn State averaged 0.65 yards before contact per rush against Purdue. Its season average last year was 1.89, which ranked 76th. Thursday night's average was a lower number than every 2021 game but Ohio State.
I mean, that is really surprising to me because it didn't feel that. I mean, the only time I really specifically remember someone getting hit behind the line of scrimmage was Nick Singleton. And that's the only time. But
and the cliff sack, which probably tanked some of those numbers a good bit.
Sure, yeah, and the cliff sack, yeah. But to continue along this thread here, this was not submitted by Twitter. This is one that I came up with here. And Bill, we'll start with you. Related to the run game here, especially since we were talking about the 2019 team, which of course had a different offensive line coach. So here's my opinion. This is a make or break year for Phil Trautwein. Overreaction or underreaction?
I would say in practice, that is probably spot on, possibly even an underreaction. The reason I would say that I would argue it's an overreaction is one thing that I think happens in sports, and it's something that I think happens to the detriment of teams, to units, to players, all these sorts of things, is you make a bad hire, or not even you make a bad hire, you make a hire that doesn't work out for one reason or another, or it's a change in philosophy or a change in this or a change in that. And you give the guy 2 or 3 years and then you get rid of him because he's not doing what you wanted, and you bring someone else in, and that cycle goes and goes and goes. Penn State has quite literally, with maybe 1 or 2 exceptions, had what any of us would call a good offensive line under James Franklin. And I don't think Phil Trautwein is the problem if that has been the case for as long as it has been the case. And if you are going to, because this is his 3rd year, his first year was the pandemic year, his second year was last year with the new offensive coordinator, and now this is year number 3. I think you need to give him 4 or 5 years. I truly believe that, unless it is just like a totally toxic situation. And that is going to be my answer to another question that you're going to have in a second, Nick. But I think if you are not giving a guy a chance to come in and put their own stamp on things over a large enough period, and with the way that Penn State has recruited the offensive line under Phil Trautwein and had consistent offensive line issues under James Franklin, whether the offensive line coach has been Herb Hand or Matt Limegrover or Phil Trautwein, I think getting rid of him after 3rd year, particularly when you consider the circumstances of his first year, would be doing this dude a little dirty.
Yeah, I agree. I'll let Matt dive in with his thoughts, though.
Yeah, I'm glad Bill made that point that the line has been bad under Franklin for forever. And they've done the reset every 3 odd years or so. Limegrover was 16, 17, 18, 19. He got 4 years. And let's be honest, the recruiting under Limegrover was not like it was under Trautwein. Trautwein has Drew Shelton, Landon Tengwall, and now the first 5-star offensive lineman of the Franklin era. Michael Mennett could be considered that, depending on where you look, but it looks like Birchmeier is going to end up being a consensus 5-star. And you also got Javen Williams. Like, he is building his room the way he wants to build it. So I think to pull the plug now is really damaging to the development of Tengwall, a guy we think is a future Sunday player, Shelton, a guy who projects as one. And if the recruiting services, if you value stars, Birchmeier and Jaden Williams are both projected, potentially, again, this is so far in advance, but those are potential Sunday players. So if you pull the plug now, you're, kind of going back to square one. I'm not saying those guys would decommit or people would leave, but players seem to like Trautwein. Bill, I agree. 2020 kind of gets a mulligan. But I think this is a bit of an underreaction. I think it's getting warmer, a lot warmer. I think if the sack numbers were bad on top of the run game being bad, I think this is an open and shut case. But I think pass blocking looks really good. So you can kind of, hold on being a half unit for a while. But you have to take that step. If not, in the next couple of weeks, then, by September of 2023 at the absolute latest.
And I'm going to interject and say 2 things. One, with Limegrover, his best unit was his last one. His best unit was the one where he got guys in that fit what he wanted to do and he got a chance to develop them. But the other thing that I want to add, and I think this is, I think this is illuminating. You look along Penn State's offensive line, and the veterans of that group, Juice Scruggs, per 24/7, his primary recruiter was Matt Limegrover. His secondary recruiter was Joe Moorhead. Bryce Effner, his 2018, Juice Scruggs was also 2018. Bryce Effner, primary recruiter was Ricky Ronnie. Secondary recruiter was Matt Limegrover. I have read off 3 different coaches for those first 2 guys. Class of 2019, Salim Wormley. Primary recruiter was Phil Galliano. Secondary recruiter was Matt Limegrover.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. And Caden Wallace, primary recruiter, Matt Limegrover. Secondary recruiter, Phil Galliano. That is for 4 different players, 4 different coaches, with one common thread among all of them. I think, yes, I'm a little bit confused as to what has gone on with the development of Caden Wallace. I've been happy with what's happened with the development of Salim Wormley and Juice Scruggs. Obviously, Scruggs comes with the extra asterisk of, he had his car accident, which impacted his playing career. But you look through that and you see just how many different guys have had their fingerprints along the offensive line. How can an offensive line be in a position to succeed when that many different voices, people, inputs? I read off 2 separate Penn State offensive coordinators in that without mentioning the current Penn State offensive coordinators. So I think,
or the one before it.
No, Moorhead was in there.
No, Chiraka.
Oh, that's right. Jesus, God, I forgot about that. So yeah, you look at all that stuff, and I don't think firing Phil Trautwein is going to give you any answers along the offensive line. So to that extent, I say it's an overreaction. Having said that, if for whatever reason the run game is just bunk this year, just total garbage this year, yeah, I think that he's going to be one of the guys who has to answer for that.
I'm glad you both brought up the point of just that perhaps of all the position coaches on a team, offensive line coach, I mean, I agree in my opinion as well, is the one that you should, unless it really, really is a disaster, is the one that you just need patience with. Because I think way too many people, just way too many fans in general, have this opinion that, well, it's offensive line. What do you mean you just stand there and block? Like but it's not that. Like, they're different guys teach different techniques. Different guys teach different schemes altogether. Like I just think there's a bit of a fundamental misunderstanding of how offensive line play is taught, and not enough people realize that there are significant differences coach to coach, and it's not as simple as one new guy comes in this year and you forget everything that you learned under the last, coach, or in some of these guys' cases, 3 coaches, 4 coaches that they've had at their position, or the coordinators for them. So yeah, I agree. I think
real quick. Sorry, go ahead.
No.
Real quick, of everybody who started a game for Penn State on Thursday, I don't know why I said that so weird. Of the 5 guys who started along Penn State's offensive line, who played the best?
The best?
Fashanu or Wormley. Probably.
Yeah, I'd say
Fashanu.
Yeah, I might go Wormley, but Fashanu, I didn't hear his name, so I'm going to vote Fashanu.
Yeah, one of the PFF guys said that he did his thread of under the radar players, and he under the players who had a good week that he noticed on film, and Fashanu was the first name that he mentioned.
And what's the only difference between Olu Fashanu and everyone else along that offensive line?
Was when they were, well, I don't want to say when they were recruited, but my guess is, are you going for something like that? Like, what are you going for here?
The only one who wasn't a blue chip prospect, and the only one who spent his whole career under Phil Trautwein.
Tangwall.
Shoot, that is,
yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But Olu played the best. But he wasn't. And the 3-star. Chase the point. And the 3-star. So my point kind of still stands.
Yeah.
But he was the only one to have his whole career be a not blue chip prospect. So that ball of clay, and the only one to be coached his whole career by Phil Trautwein. So I think that's kind of the difference. So I think that says a lot about where Trautwein is. Like, that's his guy. Like, that is not the guy who came in expecting to play. Olu was the guy who the staff said, here is a ball of clay, make him into a Division I caliber, Big Ten caliber offensive lineman. Like, Tangwall was going to be that no matter where he went. He was going to be that early. For Fashanu, it was always going to take development. So I'm willing to give Trautwein maybe that extra year of grace because he's proven that with a guy like Fashanu. But again, if the job's not getting done in 2023, we have to have this conversation again.
When I think about how Phil Trautwein has done such a great job of developing Olu Fashanu into a starting caliber left tackle, it often leads me to think about, the development process that Home Field goes through to create their beautiful T-shirts. How's that for a transition?
I thought you were going with something with the Seahawks, and I was going to scream.
You've heard us talk about Home Field before on the podcast. Wonderful new sponsor of ours. They, if you don't have a Home Field shirt by now, first of all, what are you doing? If you have never ordered from there before, please go on there right now. Use the code ROARLIONS, or all caps, all one words, for 15% off your first order. But Home Field Apparel, Penn State, we are the big new Saturday champions of Home Field Apparel for all time for a reason. It's because they made a fantastic line of Penn State shirts. They did a great job going back through the archives of Penn State history to find amazing designs that you will not find anywhere else, not even back in the heyday of the Roar Lions Roar Apparel store. They just make great stuff. It evokes the past. It's really just awesome designs that you would not find elsewhere. It's the kind of stuff that Penn State themselves will never make. It's the kind of stuff you won't find at the Family Clothesline or McClanahan's. It's worth going and at least checking out, finding something great for yourself. Awesome material. They're not going to shrink in the wash. They're not that 100% cotton Gildan tee. You can buy them with confidence, knowing that they will look good and they will feel good. So once again, if you have not ordered from Home Field already, take advantage of this one-time offer and use the code ROAR, Lions Roar, all caps, all one word at checkout for 15% off of your first order. They are great friends to Roar, Lions Roar. They make great stuff. Go show them some love. Now, let's go back. This is one of my favorite suggestions, opinions that we got from the artist formerly known as Real Pen Live Comments, and that is Chop Robinson is a dude. Bill, this feels, to me, it feels either spot on or an underreaction. He balled out.
You're asking me if the 5-star who
was he 5 stars?
Played, he was by 24/7 Sports. He asked by the composite. He was the number 68 player in his class. So you're asking me if that guy, the guy who 6'4", 250 edge rusher who was playing with his hand in the dirt for the first time on a brand new team with brand new teammates, all of whom either did not play or had their season cut short last year, and did not look out of place at all. You're asking me if that guy's a dude? Yeah, he's a dude. This is an underreaction. I think that one thing that I think I said it on the pod, the recap pod, or I've definitely said it while talking about this Penn State team to friends. I am 110% convinced that when we think of where every unit is now in 2 months, when it's November 6th and we're talking about this Penn State team, that's whoever they play after Ohio State. That's that Sunday recap pod. I will wager that we are going to be on here, talking to one another in Slack, talking to our friends who aren't Penn State fans and saying, boy, that defensive line has come along in a big way, and Chop Robinson's probably, I would go as far as say he might end up being the biggest reason why. I'm very, very high on this guy. So I will say that is spot on.
So Matt, assuming that you agree, I'm just going to flip this a little bit and just kind of turn this into a question for you. Are you surprised that it seems like he's pretty ready to flourish right now? Are you surprised that it happened this quickly?
No, he saw the field in Big Ten action last year. Like this isn't a true freshman. Like this dude's been through the ringer of the Big Ten and the Big Ten East. I am kind of surprised that he looks not as big, and how do I want to word this? For a guy who didn't have his hand in the dirt, he looked surprisingly comfortable going up against big offensive tackles one-on-one. And I didn't expect that. And the really interesting part about Chop is, he's, what do you think, 7 months really into embracing this new role whenever the transfer formally took place and, his reps. And he's a dude who's not even draft eligible yet. Like, he is so young and still so new. So, like, I really think we're just scratching the surface of what Chop Robinson can be. In terms of if I'm surprised, I'd say I'm not surprised he's dominant or looking to be a dominant player quickly. I am surprised at what he is very good at already. Like, I thought he would be good, but I thought he'd be like more of a speed rush guy. But that bull rush he had to end the game was one of the more impressive feats I've seen from a young defensive lineman in a long time. So, great job to the strength staff and to John Scott Jr. for getting him ready to go. That was a hell of a play.
And even, obviously, that's the one that stands out because that's the one that the game ended on, right? But that wasn't his only bull rush of the night either. Like, he consistently was working to get through, not around, through offensive linemen. And it was working. Like, I think if that game isn't happening against Aiden O'Connell and against a team that gets the ball out as quickly as Purdue does, Chop might have had 3 sacks. Like, he was in there.
People are going to know. People are going to know Chop's name before the end of the month.
Yeah.
National people are going to know who Chop Robinson is by the end of the month.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to jump over here to this question from @YNWA Bell, who said the secondary is looking strong. So I'm going to toss this opinion out here for you, Matt. This is the best secondary James Franklin has had.
I'm going to go yes. The competition is the 2016 or 2017 team. 16 would have had Marcus Allen, Grant Haley, Christian Campbell, Amani O, John Reed, because John Reed missed 17. Yeah, John Reed missed 17. I think Troy Apke would have been in there too. Like, there's dudes who played in the NFL and dudes who were drafted on that one. I think this group is better. Porter's draftable. Brown's draftable. The younger guys are on pace to play like draftable prospects. And in 16 and 17, they played behind a defensive front that got 40 sacks. What we saw on Thursday night was a team not being able to get home, not speeding O'Connell up, and they still played a really solid game. And I think that's rare. I think that's rare for a college secondary to be able to make plays like that without a college quarterback having things sped up a lot for him. So I think that's a very on target reaction that this is the best secondary James Franklin's ever had.
Bill, with only one game in the books, do you agree?
No, I'm going to say overreaction and basically say, and it's not because I don't think this one is spectacular. It's just I still think they have more to prove compared to the one of guys that like are like it's a bunch of guys who made it to the NFL. Some cases are still in the NFL. Like the two biggest plays of my Penn State fandom were made by members of the secondary. One was tackling a running back, one was blocking a kick, but like the general sentiment still applies. We're just like, when that unit needed to do something special and Brandon Bell didn't hurt his wrist returning an interception and therefore Penn State lost its most important player on that defense, that group always delivered. So I will say 2016, 2017, whatever it was. And again, that is in no way a knock to this one. I just want to see more out of this one before I'm willing to say that.
So to kind of zoom out here back to a full team look, I want to look at this opinion from @William Tiberius. This one's really interesting to me. And Bill, we'll start with you. His opinion, that we will decide whether it's an overreaction or underreaction or spot on, is that Penn State has already exceeded expectations. Now, you can kind of, define that how you want. Obviously, we're not talking full season because the full season hasn't happened yet, right? Like, we can't talk about they exceeded our expectation of 10-2 or whatever it is. But actually, I won't qualify it anymore. I'll just let you go here. We have already exceeded expectations.
I would say that's an overreaction because the expectation for this Penn State team is that they have the talent to, maybe it's finished third in the Big Ten West. Big Ten East. Apologies. If they finished third in the Big Ten West, that's a problem. But maybe it's finished third in the Big Ten East. Maybe even push for second, depending on what this Michigan team is. And I don't think we saw anything to indicate that they can exceed expectations by finishing second, by winning the Big Ten East, or by, anything that makes us go, oh no, this season is going to be a catastrophe. They're finishing below Indiana. So I think that's a bit of a stretch. I will say that is an overreaction. But I'd like it if they could. Like I thought they were going to win a close game against Purdue, and they did end up winning a close game against Purdue. So to that extent, maybe this is spot on. I don't know.
Matt, agree?
I think it's an overreaction because what was the win total set at? 8.5. That's
I think so.
More than 8. That's more than 8. I mean, I think Ohio State, Michigan, a lot of us are looking at as losses, and then you just got to lose, one more. Auburn, Michigan State, Minnesota, maybe. I think this program so far has met expectations just nationally. Like, if you look at what people in the desert thought they would win this game. Penn State was favored. So I don't think we can say that they've exceeded expectations, just yet. I think you could say individuals have, but, the team as a whole, they were supposed to win this game. In the vacuum of they were the favorite in the game, and in the, if you zoom out a bit, in the fact that their win total was over 8. And they needed to win this game to get over 8. I think that's fair to say. So I don't think it's overperforming just yet. Talk to me after Auburn. And
yeah,
from there.
I was one thing I regret not saying is this is a question to ask after the Auburn game, or this. This might even be a question to ask after looking at their schedule. maybe after playing Northwestern, and maybe after we get a little bit, we start to get into Big Ten play after they play Michigan. There are so many other games after which I think this is a more pertinent question that, I'm not too far into believing they've greatly exceeded or greatly underperformed expectations after the Purdue game.
The great news is that the bye week follows Northwestern, so we could definitely do this again right after that and bring up this same conversation again.
It's possible.
So I
thought about going up to Northwestern's campus and just bringing my microphone and recording this on a bench, just on campus. I don't know what I would gain from it. I don't know. It's a private school. Maybe they'd kick me off campus, but I thought about it. Maybe I'll do it.
I mean, if it went really well, then we might just have to start sending you to all the Big Ten campuses to record podcasts. So,
how much money do you think we have?
Promo code Roar Lions Roar. Check it out.
Oh, well done. Well done. So,
thank you. I'm a pro.
Speaking about, money, let's talk about that money punting that we saw from Barney and Moore at Lock Haven Eagle.
Wow.
At Lock Haven Eagle has the opinion that punting will be a strength. If we look at the game from this past week, not weekend, Barney and Moore averaged 46.9 yards per punt on his 8 punts, had 3 downed inside the 20, and had a long of 52 yards. He looks pretty good. Matt, overreaction, underreaction, spot on?
I'm gonna go overreaction. I will say, not yet. I need to see more. This is a dude who's punted 1 game at the FBS level against a Purdue team that never really sent the house after him. They did not try to put a lot of pressure on. I know he's a 6th-year guy, but he's only really punted 1 season prior to this at Colgate. So I think it's really good. I think it can be really good. I think it will be really good, but I can't crown it elite just yet. I need to see a little bit more. And also, do we count coverage as part of an elite punting game? Because the coverage was overall fine, pretty good, but you had that mistake. So if you factor that in there, that's something you have to work out, and that's just another data point. So I'm going to say it's so far overreaction, but on track to be a proper reaction.
I do think the coverage team is part of it. We're talking about punting, right? Kicking the ball is 80% of the equation, but that last 20% does count. I'm curious, does the fact that they did it against Charlie Jones, did
he field any? Was the coverage that bad to where he had the chance to field any and be a realistic threat? I don't think that was the case.
There was a mental one or two where he fielded it and started to move, but the coverage team got down there.
And I think there was one where he called a fair catch and probably shouldn't have, but maybe he was a little spooked by the play to that point.
Yeah, that's still part of it. But again, you had a perfect punt down on the 1, and for some reason you batted it into the end zone and gave a dangerous offense free 25 yards or 20 yards, whatever it is.
Daquan's only mistake.
I know. He was awesome outside of that, man. But yeah, I mean, on track to be a good, an accurate take, but just too early for me to crown it just yet.
Now that I've mentioned Daquan, Matt, you're on notice. You have about 15 minutes or so to mention Hakeem Beamon. Bill, right. What do you think? Punting will be a strength. Over, under, spot on.
I'll say that's spot on. I think Amore had a really good game. 2019, he was a 2nd team All Patriot League. It's not like he's a guy who had never punted and never had any success punting during his tenure. He averaged 42.1 yards per punt for the team that year. On Thursday night, he averaged 46.9. So he had a really good night. I think like we mentioned, at no point did Jones look like he was going to do anything. He tried to return 1 punt and he got 0 yards for it. So I think the emphasis that we have seen Penn State place on special teams over the years, both as it's part of the game, but also we're putting guys out there who are important players for us. We're putting a guy like, maybe it is a Daquan Hardy on the punt team or the kickoff team, and we want them to get on the field and use their athletic gifts, their knowledge of football, whatever, to stop the other team from getting a good return. And I think that they will just have a really good punting team. So I will say that is spot on.
I think James Franklin also deserves a little bit of credit as far as the special teams goes, because, and to be fair, I don't really know how deeply other teams, I don't know what their other coaching lineups are, but James Franklin has shown that he will oust a special teams coach if they're not getting the job done. He's had to do it at least a couple times, I think. So I think that's just, I think that's a credit to him that I think that's something he doesn't get credit for, is treating that truly as a big slice of the pie when it comes to the larger football game. So I do think he deserves some credit there. So
I mean, the biggest play of his career came on special teams.
Right. Yeah. So the last two opinions here that we're going to go through, and then we'll get out of here and start prepping for our Ohio preview pod.
Revenge game, baby.
Bill O'Brien will be watching.
You were both at this game, correct?
Oh yeah.
The 2012 one?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
This was
this game was famous for one thing and one thing only, and it was because Gerald Hodges returned a punt.
What didn't they
was
also
put back there to return a punt? Give me a second.
Do we know if he's team captain? Is he the Letterman captain?
He should be for every game. Gerald Hodges, 2 punt returns, -1 yard. He also returned a kickoff for 12 yards.
Wasn't this also the game where they threw that pass over the middle that deflected off the one receiver's hands and went 20 yards back, where there was another receiver waiting in the end zone?
Yeah, it was A-Rob.
No. Ohio did it.
That sounds like a thing that would have happened to that Penn State team. Sure.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look that up after this. I think that happened though. All right, Bill, opinion that I made up here. Not that I necessarily agree or disagree. Just good talking point. This is a make or break year for offensive coordinator Mike Yurcich.
I kind of touched on this with what happened with Trautwein, and I think it's a very similar thing, with the obvious ginormous caveat of, let's say the offense doesn't have an especially great year. Do you want to fire the offensive coordinator that brought Drew Aller to Penn State? Mm-hmm. Do you want to fire the offensive coordinator that you fired the last guy for after a year to bring this guy on board? And again, I'm not going to go through everything I just said with Trautwein. I think a lot of the stuff applies here with Yurcich, but I will say that is an overreaction. But depending on how the season goes, if the offense struggles, and again, we're having this conversation after Penn State's offense put up 35 points and went for 400 yards on the road in its Big Ten opener. Important to mention, but same thing. I think it's an overreaction that, depending on how the season goes, it might end up being a thing that is spot on or even an underreaction.
Matt?
Overreaction. I echo pretty much everything Bill just said. You're not getting rid of the guy who you fired the guy for after a year, who brought in the guy who's supposed to lead your program to the next level, like the quarterback. He's going to get time. The whole narrative has been Sean Clifford has control of this offense because he gets multiple years with the same offensive coordinator. Sean Clifford's gone after this year. Do you want Drew Aller to start his career, or Christian Veilleux or Bo Prabula to go start their career in the same boat? No. Unless they go 4-8 or even 5 and maybe even 3-9 is enough to save his job. Mike Yurcich is still here in 2023. And that's a good thing. I still think he's a really good offensive coordinator. I still think he has it in. What got Mason Rudolph drafted and now to be the Steelers' third string quarterback, according to the depth chart, is still in Mike Yurcich. He knows how to call an offense. I know that that's in there. I've seen it work. It worked at Oklahoma State. It worked when he was passing game coordinator for a really dangerous Ohio State attack. It worked at Texas with a quarterback in Sam Ehlinger who was different than anything he had at those previous 2 institutions. I'm a firm believer in Yurcich. I think he's going to find a way to get it done. again, I think this is more on Phil Trautwein at this point than it is on Mike Yurcich, because his guys need to create the push. So Yurcich has his whole playbook at his disposal. So I think no matter what, MY is not going anywhere anytime soon.
And one thing I want to mention, if you haven't gotten a chance to check it out, the fine folks over at For the Bloggy did its post-game film study about Penn State's final drive and how Yurcich really did an excellent job calling plays on that drive and putting a lot of trust in Sean Clifford to be able to know and understand what he had to do. And like, I will highly recommend everyone goes and checks that out, because I do think that was a good glimpse of what this offense, when it is humming, could look like.
Yeah, I agree with that. Kind of along those lines, because if the offense doesn't get humming to that point, then this is going to be a very easy answer. But the last opinion we're going to deal with here, this team is not ready to challenge Ohio State. Matt, is that an overreaction, underreaction, or is that just correct?
That's correct. They're not ready. But also, with that being said, Ohio State didn't look ready to go into a Happy Valley this past weekend. But I'm going to bet on Ohio State getting their things fixed quicker than I think Penn State will, just based on the fact that what Ohio State was bad at in 2021, it looks like they mostly fixed in 2022. What Penn State was bad at in 2021, they were still bad at in 2022. I don't think they're there yet. But thankfully, we have, 7 games in between now and then to figure it out. But they're not there yet.
Bill?
Yeah, no, they're not ready to challenge Ohio, especially because it looks like Ohio State figured out how to
play defense.
Yeah, up front on defense, and also an issue that Ohio State has had in years past was when the passing game doesn't get going, they go, all right, you know what, all CJ needs to do, or all JT or all Justin needs to do is see if you get caught, and then they're going to get in a bit of a hot streak. They ran the ball when that happened this past week, and Notre Dame, and I think Notre Dame is going to be a very good football team. I was really impressed with their performance, but offensively, Notre Dame wasn't able to get anything going, which, that makes some sense. They had a young guy walking into that environment. He was never going to be particularly great, and Ohio State's defense looked very good. So I'm going to say not ready, but I also don't necessarily think that's an indictment on this Penn State team. I just think Ohio State's going to be really good.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's good for today. I think that's been enough, trying to draw conclusions after week 1. I know it's college football and we do love to do that, but I think it's always a good thing to remind not only Penn State fans, but college football fans all over that there's only so much you can learn from week 1. And usually that so much ends up being very little, if anything at all. So with that, I think we are going to go ahead and get out of here. If you do not subscribe to the podcast already, please make sure you do so on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, Overcast, all those places. And if you could take the time to do so, we would just love it if you could leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you have any questions you'd like answered on the pod, one thing you can do is look out on the Twitter for when we ask for questions, or 2, if you leave one with a 5-star comment on Apple Podcasts, we'll happily answer it on the very next podcast after we see it. Make sure you are also subscribed to the YouTube channel. Make sure you check out the pregame show this week ahead of Ohio. We'll do it it'll end about half an hour before the game starts. So I will unfortunately have to get up here early on the West Coast to do that. Yeah, that won't be great, but I'm up anyway because around 7 o'clock, I usually wake up and flip College Game Day on. So not a big deal. And then after the game, make sure you also hop on Twitter and check out, make sure you're following at RLR Blog on Twitter, and you can join us in our Twitter space where we kind of do whatever we feel like at that point. Everyone can ask questions. It gets to be a little chaotic, but it's a lot of fun. So make sure you're following us all those places. Make sure you visit homefieldapparel.com. I think that's your URL. Use the code ROARLINES, ROAR all caps, all one word, for 15% off your very first order. And that is going to do it for us here tonight at Roar Lions Roar. For myself, Nick Pollock, for my co-host, Bill DeFilippo, and Matt Filipovitz. Wow, those are really tough to say back to back. I don't think I've ever done that before.
You handled that well.
I don't think I've ever actually had to do that. As I was saying your name, Matt, I was like, oh boy, did I mix up the emphasis there? That was pretty good.
Not that hard, but some of us are just built different.
For all three of us, thanks for listening. Go State.